Okay, good afternoon. So once again, my name is Sean Keegan, and I am the Interim Director for Accessibility at the CCC Accessibility Center. This is our second actual IT accessibility office hours, and the theme today is manual accessibility testing. And what I'm hoping is for today is more of a dialogue and a conversation rather than me simply just presenting for a whole 60 minutes here on manual accessibility testing. But I do want to hear from you. You know, what are some of the things that you've encountered? What are some of the challenges as we go through today? So I have a couple of slides to kind of kick off the conversation. But if you have something that you'd like to talk about, or if you have some questions, you know, please feel free to use the chat. Please feel free to interrupt me. Webinars are a little bit more of a casual experience. So please do not hesitate. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. And once again, these tend to be a little bit more casual. So, you know, like I said, please interrupt. So first and foremost, let's talk about manual accessibility testing. Why do we want to conduct manual accessibility testing? Any ideas?
Because you don't have the assistive technology.
You don't have assistive technology. That's one reason. Any other ideas? Come on, brave souls. You're out there. I know you are.
Well, there's some of the automated ones aren't going to pick up things. And sometimes, like a person who's blind really should look at the pages, at least, because there are things that won't get picked up that somebody out there that's using it will.
Exactly. Yeah. You're going to be in a situation where, you know, some of these automated tests are going to see the code and say, well, it looks okay, but there's a big question about functionality, right? Does it actually do what we need it to do? Does it work for us? Any other ideas?
In case of false negatives on your automated testing?
Yep. Another reason. And false positives too. Oftentimes I've encountered several situations where it's reported back as an accessibility error. And then when I've actually gone in and used it, it's actually performed quite well. So manual testing really kind of gets at to the functionality rather than the code. And so within this, you know, the automated testing allows you to do those really quick assessments. I mean, that's an advantage of the automated testing. And you can get that quick baseline assessment, you know, what's problematic, what's not problematic without any of these issues. Oops, someone's got a question. Yes, you should be hearing audio through your computer. You do not have to call in via phone, but you can do that as well. So the automated testing advantages really allows you to do that quick assessment and run through at a technical level what may or may not be an identified accessibility issue. But as Ken, I think you pointed out, these automated tools identify technical issues, not the functional. And here's the other catch. They identify approximately 30 to 40% of the technical accessibility issues. So that's a little disheartening at times, right? The automated tools, as useful as they are, don't give you that full snapshot of what's happening on your site. So we're going to actually be talking about automated testing next month. So that'll be, we're going to be talking about the tools that you can use, whether it's a scanning and evaluation tool, whether it's an in-browser tool. So, you know, I just wanted to touch on, you know, automated tools and automated testing absolutely has its place. But it's not going to capture the sum total. And this is an important part to communicate. We talked about this last month when we work with vendors. and they say, oh, we use X tool, we use Y tool to check our site. It's like, great, that's a great start. But if that's all they're doing, then there's very likely additional accessibility issues. And I'll touch on some of the kind of the emerging cases that are coming up these days. All right, so any questions, just really high level questions on the automated testing issues before we move on?
No.
Good enough for me. Moving on then. All right, so here's an example. So automated tools will go through and they'll take a look at an image. And here I've got an image of Jar Jar Binks. Everybody remembers Jar Jar Binks from Star Wars, mostly because you can't get that horrible sound of his voice and image out of your brain. But in many cases, these automated tools will go through and they'll scan the code. And here we've got some code on the right-hand side, which is the standard code that you'll see for an image. And you'll have an image, and then you'll have a source. The SRC is equal to some value, wherever the file is located. And the requirement is that for every image, you need to have an alt, right? And so from an automated perspective, you run through this scan, and it says, we have an image, great. It has a source, great. And it has an alt. The alt value is present. But in this case, I have alt equals quote, quote, which is kind of the null value for this, right? So this obviously could be a problem because from a technical standpoint, if I use an image, then I need to have an alt. But where's the functional aspect of this is really the bigger question, right? What goes in that alt? What is that alternative text description supposed to be? Now, I have my own personal opinion. So, the alt that I usually like to put in for Jar Jar Binks is alt equals Jar Jar Binks, the most despised character in the Star Wars universe. That's just my opinion. I'm sure there's lots of people who love him, like George Lucas. But that doesn't exactly rank very high in my world, on my list anymore. So the issue is that when you have certain things like images and other content, at the technical level, these tools, these automated tools will scan it and say, I see you have an image and I see you provided an alt. But there's no assessment as to the quality or what's the functional outcome of that. And that's where we come in with manual accessibility testing. That's where we come in as people and we get to look at these things and say, yes, I agree with that alt attribute. Okay. Unless you're perhaps like, a 5-year-old and think Jar Jar Binks is really, really cool. But Star Wars wasn't created for 5-year-olds. It was created for us 40-something-year-olds. So what are the questions? Do I have a resource for best practices in alt tags, the alt attributes? Good question. And yes, I do. The question is whether or not I can find it between now and the end of the presentation. There's actually a handful of different resources, and I'll post a few of them right now in the text region. One of them that I like, this was actually shared with me by a colleague who's blind and visually impaired, and it's basically called Text Alternatives, a decision tree. And I'm going to go ahead and put that in the chat region right now. And it's a couple of years old at this point, but it really kind of walks the individual through the situation of, what role does the image play? Does it present any new information? What type of information? And then it has branching aspects where it kind of goes through and talks a little bit more about, here's how you would handle this here's how you would handle from the code perspective. Would you use alt equals quote, quote? Or would you provide a longer description or some other identification? Somebody else mentioned WebAIM. has some great information on writing alts. And yeah, that's another great place to take a look at looking at images specifically. And I think they've got here, I've got the link that I can go ahead and put in the chat region right now. And we could probably do an entire hour on just image descriptions alone. But those are two that can probably get you started and take a look. If anybody else has other resources that they like to turn to, please feel free to put them in the chat region. All right, so coming back to Jar Jar. Let's see. So now that we know that there's a value in manual accessibility testing, where do we do this? Where should we conduct these tests? Now, I've got a list of potential resources to take a look at that we should look at manual testing on our sites. Site templates. That's a starting place. What is the site template? If this is a template for the main site and it's going to be used over and over again, hey, let's take care of this. Let's do a full test on the site template. It might involve automated testing as well. What are representational content pages? That's another fancy way of saying site templates. But what are content pages that are used over and over again and form that kind of that basic template environment? I also put down, interactive forms and dynamic content pages. Interactive forms are really an area that most people take a look at and say, oh yeah, it's great, and but they don't necessarily try interactive forms from a validation perspective. And we'll talk about that in a little bit, but what happens when you try to you put in the wrong information? What does the form do then? And so that's a key part of testing out forms manually to make sure that they perform as expected. I'll be talking about dynamic content pages a little bit more this in the presentation or the conversation towards the end, because there's a couple of situations that comes up, particularly nowadays with dynamic content pages. So I'll hold that one for a little bit later. And the same thing with dialogue modals and alerts. But these are kind of page interaction types where automated testing does not really capture the experience that someone with a disability or someone using assistive technology may have. And so these are two areas where manual testing works out really well. I'm a big fan of testing those login and recovery pages. It is amazing how many times, and this kind of goes back to the interactive forms, but, where there might be accessibility issues when you just simply try to log into an account. Or if your password's not working, how do you recover it? And the same thing with help and assistance pages. And the last thing we want to be doing is creating help pages that are really no help whatsoever. And that happens. Happens quite a bit. There was one college that went through a OCR review, and they had a help page because that was one of the outcomes of the OCR review. And not only was the college required to make sure all their pages conformed to the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.0, level AA, but they needed to have a help page if someone had an issue and reporting that issue back to the college representative. And of course, they put one up, and I was curious to see how they organized it, so I took a look at the page, and of course it had accessibility issues on it. So I thought it was rather an unfortunate irony that go here for help, and yet if you actually had a disability or using assistive technologies, you couldn't ask for help. It happens. Other places that on your website or applications where you may want to conduct manual accessibility testing.
Repeat the question.
Where are other places on your website or in your college environments where you may want to conduct manual accessibility testing?
So today I received an email from a colleague who has just redone the orientation website.
Mm.
So I'm trying to find the email real quick. But it was, can you check this for accessibility after it's nearly done?
Of course, I'd be happy to.
So it's,
And they want to report by tomorrow, right?
yeah, it's the final edits for the class planning module that will replace advising on the steps
Ah.
to enrollment. So, yeah, I noticed there are quite a few things I have to go back and check.
So not only, so that's actually a very good example of, another type of site or environment orientation. I think is a huge aspect that is oftentimes overlooked and not addressed. But then there's also subsequent to the where we should look, when you should be involved in that testing process. And perhaps that'll be another conversation we have down the road. But the when aspect is a critical part to this, because manual accessibility testing will take time. It will take more time than just doing an automated test. Because oftentimes there's some type of, in many of our college environments now, there's an interactive or transactional aspect to our pages. Somebody put in the group chat, course syllabus or quizzes. Absolutely. Anytime that you have some type of interactive or transactional nature occurring, where it might be kind of an assessment or a quiz type environment, absolutely you want to be taking a look at that from a manual accessibility perspective.
It also came up today in another email about open educational resources and testing for accessibility, because at the OER summit yesterday at College of the Canyons, I guess it came up and then some people said, well, how are you checking accessibility for regular textbooks? And so then it leads you into the natural conversation of, well, if you're using open educational resources, which are web-based, then it's a different check for accessibility. But that would be another area for up and coming.
That is absolutely another area that's that electronic content in general. And there's, for those that may have been sitting in on either the January 31st or today's session, the refreshed Section 508 standards do specifically call out electronic content in terms of content or documents or files that may be not web-based, not web, or not web pages specifically, but rather are still electronic files and electronic content like Microsoft Word or PowerPoint or PDF. And which parts of the standards still apply. So in those situations, you're absolutely looking at manual accessibility testing in addition to some of the automated tests that can be performed. So yeah, that's an excellent point about particularly in the OER realm and online textbooks and things of that nature. All right. Well, if you've got any ideas, please feel free to speak up as we go forward. So where to conduct manual testing? A number of different areas. Okay, moving forward. So how do we start doing this? Well, an easy step, an easy one that I like is kind of the No Mouse challenge. This is actually a project initiative out of the Do It grant initiative up at the University of Washington. And I'll put in the link in the chat region. So it's called the No Mouse Challenge, nomouse.org. And the idea behind the No Mouse Challenge is, can you interact with your website or web content without using the mouse? And they've done a nice job. They lay it out very, very briefly. It's very simple, but how can you use the keyboard to navigate around a web page and still gain access to the content? So the no mouse challenge, I like to point out to people who are kind of new to this and kind of like, well, I'm not really sure where to begin and where to start. It's like, well, hey, try the no mouse challenge. Go to the website, see what's happening there. They have it broken up to kind of like step 1, step 2, step 3 type of situation. Very, very simple. So a shout out to the no mouse challenge if you're looking for a real simple starting point. Another one that, oops. I put together about 5 manual accessibility tests that I like to do myself, just to kind of, keep abreast of what's happening on the page or in the application before I even start using the screen reader. Okay, so I'm not even using assistive technology at this point. This is really just a matter of, hey, what are some manual tests that I can do before I even want to start handling or managing the assistive technology aspects, because that introduces a whole other level of complexity. So some manual tests that I personally like is, can you use the tab key to navigate to interactive elements? Those would be hyperlinks, form fields, buttons, things that you press or things that you type into on the web page. The tab key is kind of the way to get around. So can you navigate from element to element to element? Okay, and hopefully in that conversation, is it happening in a sequential order? I found more and more applications where people, for some reason, have believed that the tab index should be brought back to life and with positive values. So tab index equals 1, tab index equals 2, tab index equals 3, and so on and so forth. Positive values should not be used with the tab index, is the short version. So the first one is, can you use the tab key to navigate to those interactive elements? Second one, can you activate hyperlinks with the return or enter key? Okay, so hyperlinks, those are things that you obviously can hopefully tab to it, and then can you activate it with the enter key? Same thing with buttons. Can you navigate to the button? And what happens if you use either the enter key or the space bar? Does it work? And this is kind of the reason I asked that question with the detail, with the space bar or the enter key, is that there's a difference between hyperlinks and buttons. And there's been this design pattern over the last, 6 months or so, or longer than that, actually. I'm sorry, much longer than that. I've just seen it show up a lot more in higher education applications and such in the last 6 to 8 months, where people try to make buttons look like hyperlinks and hyperlinks look like buttons. And that is absolutely maddening, because you tab to something and be like, I want to activate this. And you may try to hit the space bar and it doesn't work because it's not a button, it's a hyperlink. The two are very different in how they perform and how they function. Buttons are designed to do something on the page. Hyperlinks take you someplace. And so conceptually, they operate in a different way. And the issue is that for someone who is using assistive technology, they are told, hey, this is a button or this is a hyperlink. But the challenge can come into play is when you have a design pattern that flips those around, it may not look like one, but it operates like one. Okay, so I like to call those out and say, can you still activate and operate these links and buttons with the keyboard? Number 4, a real simple one. Some people like to go through form fields and run automated tests and screen readers and such. I have a kind of a quick fix or quick strategy in terms of manual testing to see if the on-screen text label is programmatically associated with the input field. That's the requirement. You need to have this on-screen text programmatically associated with the input field itself. The reason being is that if someone's using the assistive technologies, when they set focus in that input field, the assistive technologies are supposed to recognize and say, hey, I'm going to now speak the label. Whether you're using JAWS or VoiceOver or NVDA, the idea is that when focus is placed in the input field, it references that text label. So a real quick way to see, hey, did someone set this form up the right way, is to click on that text label on the form field. It's really simple, because if you click on that text label on the web page, focus, the cursor should automatically jump to the input field. If it doesn't, there's a bigger problem. Then you've got to do a little bit more work. But as a starting point, I want to click on that text field, or I'm sorry, click on that text label on the screen. Where does the cursor go? It goes in the input field. Excellent, I'm happy. Okay. Number 5, out of my list of 5, manual testing. Do videos have captions? and it's kind of it seems like kind of a jump. We're talking about a lot of text content, but oftentimes you'll have situations where there's videos on the page, and automated tools will say, oh, there's a problem with the video player, but they never actually check the content. And so being able to ask yourself, do the videos have captions? And, are they accurate? It is an important manual test to perform. So 5 simple things that you can do to do manual tests. Anybody have others that they like to use? Any other, or questions about these? Or does anybody want to argue about these? I'm happy to do that too.
You know what this makes me think of, Sean? Remember you created a DVD way back when for the High Tech Center training unit on some of these items?
Yes, I do remember those videos.
And I'm thinking, similar to what Jamie's created for the OEI, videos for this sort of very basic five items could go a long way.
Yep. But if you like these 5, but wait, there's more. So one of the questions that came up is it acceptable to have a transcript when you have a video? It's just mostly background images. The short answer is no. If it's going to be a video file, then you need to have synchronized captions on the screen. For audio files, a transcript is totally fine. Okay, if you've got just an audio file only, a transcript is fine. That's not an issue. But if there's a visual aspect to it, then it does need to have that synchronized aspect. Auto captions, and yes, in terms of for the captions, speaker identification is occurring, particularly if there's more than one speaker. And that's one of the problems you run into with the auto captioning component, is that I've seen auto captions that are accurate. YouTube has gotten better. I don't rely on it, but YouTube has absolutely gotten better. The problem, though, is that there's no speaker identification. There's no information necessarily about the audio track itself. What are maybe some ancillary audio activities that are happening perhaps as part of the video itself? So to that extent, automatic captions are not considered to be acceptable. Let's see. So auto captions can do a great job in terms of getting that in that first pass of a transcript, but then it needs to be cleaned up and edited with punctuation, capitalization, spell checking, that sort of thing. And yes, yes, but no. So someone just posted a message in the group, in the chat. The auto captions, you do need to have the punctuation in there. It does need to be accurate, and just a raw string of text is not appropriate. If one person is speaking, they would need to be identified at the beginning, and then you don't need to do it after that. What I always like to do when I have questions about captioning is the described and captioned media program. It's got a great captioning key. And if I can have the link here. Here we go. Quality captioning. So this is kind of the resource that I turn to. And it's called the captioning key. I'll just put it into the chat area. I like to turn to this resource when I have questions about captioning, what is or is not appropriate, and perhaps how to do some of these things. The captioning key, it starts off on quality captioning, but you can navigate throughout the entire document in different ways. So I would say, please take a look at that right now. We also have a request. If there's someone that's running a printer or some other type of scanner, if you can mute your line, please, because we're hearing what you're doing. All right. So moving forward, so we talked about these 5 issues, right? And from these, so we talked about these 5 manual testing. This is simple. This is really easy to do. Anyone can do it, right? Of course, now we can continue that there's lots of things that you can actually take a look at for manual testing. So manual testing, and I broke it out kind of into content issues versus interaction issues, okay? And that's something that I've done simply to keep my own sanity as I'm going through pages and doing my own assessments. I like to kind of break things up in terms of what might be a content issue versus what might be an interaction issue. And it helps organize this, particularly when working with developers and giving feedback that, you know, is this related to content and who needs to fix that versus is it related to the template and the code of the page and maybe how it's structured, okay? So here's some content issues. And I actually have both the content and the interaction issues available online at the CCC Accessibility website. So I'm going to put that into the chat region right now. And where it talks about manual and automated accessibility testing, but I have a full list there broken up about these content and interaction types. So let me talk about content first though, because some of these come up as issues under WCAG, Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.0, level A or AA. And they're not necessarily things that an automated tool is going to catch. So one of the big ones that's a requirement under WCAG 2AA is, you know, are you using page titles? And are they unique? Right? So are page titles being used? And you know, that's really important because page titles basically form the text equivalent of the bookmark, right? They're also used when Google does searches and things like that. But page titles are really important. And you know, are page titles being used and are they unique? I mean, you know, I've seen a number of applications where it says it has the same page title through the entire application. And so you don't necessarily know, are you on the search page? Are you on the user preferences page? I mean, you can figure it out, but page titles become an important content issue. Is there skip navigation available? You know, and does it work? That becomes an interaction issue. But is skip navigation present on these pages, particularly when you have these repeated navigational elements? Is there a way to bypass that? One that's not necessarily a WCAG 2 requirement, but I like to check this information. Do the web pages have the appropriate HTML5 and WAY ARIA elements? So that we have we have main content or content info or complementary content. These are ways of organizing that page so that someone using assistive technology can get an idea of what's the landscape of the page. How is it organized? What might be a banner on that page? What might be the navigational content on that page? Other content issues, headings. Does the page have any headings on it? Or are they kind of sprinkled around like commas? I got a heading 3, I got a heading 4, I got a heading 1, I got a heading 2. I really like heading 7, I'm kidding. But my point is that, how are the headings used? Are they sequential and logical? Do data tables contain the appropriate headers and markup? And by that, I mean, I've seen, and this happened recently with a developer, they were using kind of a script that created this data table. And as we were doing an evaluation, the automated tool said, yep, it passes. And then I went and took a look at it. And the actual headers was series 1, series 2, series 3, series 4, series 5, etc. And those were supposed to actually represent the values, the actual, the degree programs. In this case, it was higher education degree programs at an institution. Series 1, series 2, series 3, nobody gets an AA degree or an MS or bachelor's degree in series 1 or series 2 or series 3, right? So that was one of those things where there was text content and it was appropriately coded, but it didn't make any sense whatsoever. And once again, do videos have captions? I like to put that in there because it's like, yeah. No, it's actually really serious. Do videos have captions? Getting the right order. So one of the questions that just came through the chat window is, correcting headings in the right order. How important is that? And I would say it is important. Is it a blocker issue? Does it prevent a person from interacting with the page? No, it doesn't. I mean, but that being said, it does not help communicate the content effectively. And, I've seen situations where pages might skip from heading 1 to heading 3 simply because of the way the page template is laid out. But from heading 3 on, it's consistent. So I like to point out that needs to be corrected. At the same time, though, I also recognize that it doesn't completely block someone from accessing the page, but it does create some cognitive it can create some cognitive overload. It can say, wait a minute, what happened to the heading 2 content? Where did it go?
Can I back up and ask a video question?
Absolutely.
So I was given a video to put online that had no audio, had no voiceover, but there was text. It was instructions on how to download an app to pay for parking on campus for visitors. And because there's text online but no audio, I sent it back to them and said, for folks who can't see it, can you put words on it? I asked them to do audio on it. Would it have been just as well to have text instructions on the page for screen readers?
Yeah, I think that would have been a great, I think that would have worked as well too.
Okay.
Yeah. And the other part of it too is that I think it's important to recognize that as we, perhaps it's a little bit of a cliche at this point, but who is your intended audience, and what types of devices would they be using? And the reason I bring that up is, mobile is a the big area, particularly in a parking situation. If I'm trying to figure out information about parking, because I didn't plan ahead and I got to the college and now I got to figure out, okay, wait a minute, what do I do for parking? And I do a search. What's going to load faster, the video or the text on the page? And similarly, I may want to just scan through the instructions as opposed to watching the video.
Yes. But so another thing about this case, not to get off topic, but you actually have to register with their service before you can use it. So
even better.
So there's so much pre-planning required. That's a whole nother problem.
Yeah, that would be a whole nother issue, I think. Yeah, I hate that. Mostly because I'm the guy that's sitting there at the college with 10 minutes before I have to be someplace going, why won't it take my credit card? Oh, I didn't register.
Right.
Perhaps that would be that could be a heading. You must register first. So a question that came through is, how do you deal with data visualizations, pulling in from other sites or services? That's a great question. And unfortunately, I don't have a link handy with me right now. The situation I was referring to earlier about the data table was actually a situation where the bar charts were being created from the data table information content, and there was basically a script. It's off of GitHub where it basically moved this data table, and the way they decided to do it was kind of an off-screen perspective. So it was hidden from sighted individuals, but it was available to someone using a screen reader, and it took the information, and so you created this bar chart dynamically based on the information that was in the table form. Now, going the other direction is going to be a little bit more challenging, and there are some and I'll be able to post them. I can post them to the IT Access list when I have a chance. There are some scripts and tools out there that can go from the visual aspect back to more of a data table. But in those cases, once again, it depends on what the intent of the data visualization may be. Sometimes it may be showing a trend. And so the full data information is not necessarily required. It's simply providing a text description of the trend that a sighted person may have to provide. I'm going to skip to, so we talked about content issues. There's now interaction issues, and these, like I said, there's a longer list at the automated manual accessibility testing page site. But what are some interaction issues? One of the things that I like to do is just in the browser, can I zoom to 200%? What happens when I do that command +++ or control +++ in Firefox or Chrome? Does the page reorganize? Does it respond in such a way that I still can see what's happening? Okay, that's a real simple fit. That's a real simple check. What happens when I'm tabbing around the interface? Is the browser focus still visible? And that's a WCAG requirement, that there needs to be an on-screen focus indicator as you tab around the hyperlinks, buttons, form fields. What about modals? So everybody loves modals, those kind of overlays that pop up in front of you. Where is there keyboard support? Does it trap focus? That's a big one. That's supremely frustrating, particularly as you start to tab in around and you realize you're not tabbing through the modal, that thing that's in front of you. You're tabbing on the back side of the page. And so it might be 30 more tabs by the time you get back to the modal. What about media player controls? It's really easy to embed a video into a page. Like, hey, I'm going to put YouTube in my page. But can you control those player controls from the keyboard? And then form validation. I talked about this a little bit earlier, but what happens when you submit incorrect information? Are those errors identified? That's the first question. Are the errors identified? And then secondly, is focus directed back to the appropriate field where that error occurred? There is nothing more frustrating when you're trying to, get through an airline site or a restaurant site and it says, "I'm sorry, there's an error," and you're like, "Where?" And it's gotten better, but one, is the error identified, and two, where is focus directed to when it happens? A question came up, are these things done well in Canvas? Yeah, for the most part. Canvas has actually done a pretty good job of addressing accessibility. They've been working with a number of groups and users to kind of test their interface. Are they perfect? No, they're not. But they've gotten a majority of what I consider to be the blocker and major issues addressed. It still does take a little bit, still takes a significant amount of familiarity if you're trying to, author quizzes and things like that. But from a student-facing side, who's not necessarily on the authoring side, it actually works pretty well. I think they could do some additional work on their rich text editor and, selecting files and things, but it does do a good job from a keyboard perspective. And and another question, is Zoom an acceptable choice accessibility-wise? They're another group that we've actually been using a number of these manual accessibility tests to take a look at Zoom. And I have to say, their most recent version has a lot of accessibility features built in. They've come a long way in a very short time. In a few months, they've done a lot. A few more things they need to fix, but I'm feeling more and more confident that Zoom is going to be a very accessible platform very, very soon. So I wanted to talk, here's an example of a modal on the screen. And basically, this is a real simple modal. I mean, I've got this little box that sits in front of the page. And I wanted to call this out because what I am showing here is that when you open a modal, it kind of shows up in the front of the page. And a really important part of this is not only testing with the keyboard, but then also going back and testing with assistive technology, and in particular, screen readers. And the issue that comes up is that when you have a modal that shows now in front of you, as this one does, okay, because the rest of the screen has now kind of gone this dark gray, we've got this little window in front of us. From a screen reader perspective, you want to be able to navigate that modal and not get out of it. You want focus to be trapped in that modal region. If you can get out of it, well, then you can go start reading the rest of the page. But what have they done visually on this page? They've kind of grayed it out, right? So you're not supposed to be there. So this is where you start to transition from, hey, I'm just using standard keyboard access to, okay, it may work with the keyboard, but now how does it function with assistive technology? Okay. My first check that I always do with modals, can I dismiss the modal with the escape key? Usually if you can do that, then it's like, okay, we're on the right path. I'm not bitter yet. I'm cautiously optimistic. So modals are one in which we need to do a little bit more extensive testing, I believe, with the manual accessibility test. It's not enough just to do the keyboard. Then you need to start moving into assistive technology. Another area where you need to move into assistive technology is when you're dealing with single page applications. It's not enough just to do the manual accessibility test. You kind of have to start to migrate into using assistive technology to actually test the functional outcomes. So I've got an example of a sample page here. It's got a top banner region with this is all just kind of template style. So it's got a top blue banner region, and then the big purple region below has got some content. Maybe it's a couple of paragraphs, right? Single page applications are really unique. You're finding them, they're written in Angular, React, so on. And the catch with single page applications is that there's no browser refresh. You're just swapping in different views. Okay. And so here we have a page that has this top blue banner region and then this big purple paragraph region. But let's say I hit a link in that paragraph. And next thing I know, I now have 5 columns of data. Maybe I said, show me the table. Now I've got 5 columns of data. While the purple region may have changed visually, the page itself did not do a refresh. Anybody know why that can be problematic?
Because when you hit the back button, it's going to go back to the previous page, not the previous screen or section you were on.
That could be one issue. It could go back to the previous page, not the section you're on. The other issue that comes up is that assistive technologies are oftentimes looking for that browser refresh. And because it never happened, there's no change. They don't tell the user, hey, the page has now been changed. Right? So visually, we have a change from the previous single page application. We got this paragraph layout to now we have this 5-column layout. Well, it changed visually, but the assistive technology was never informed of this change. And so with single page applications, and we're seeing them, I mean, they're everywhere now, not everywhere, but many places nowadays, particularly airline sites, Netflix, you'll see them there as well. What happens here is that you need to manage the focus. The designer or developer needs to manage the focus such that as the page view changes, the assistive technology then communicates and says, hey, I'm now on a different page. Okay. You're not going to know that if you're just doing manual testing, because you're like, oh, it looks great. That being said, this is where assistive technologies needs to be starting to layer in terms of the testing process itself. And so testing with assistive technology. So we kind of started off with some real simple manual accessibility testing. Now we're kind of finishing up with, right, when you're going to test with assistive technology, what should you be considering? My personal process is come up with a standard platform and applications that you're going to test. And that might be, I use JAWS with Internet Explorer. Well, that's kind of changing nowadays. But I always use NVDA with Firefox, and I always use VoiceOver with Safari. That's my standard test suite. And if something doesn't work, and that's the problem with Internet Explorer these days, even IE 11 is still a little outdated when it comes to working with a lot of these newer web technologies. So I sometimes cheat a little bit and I'll say, I'm going to use JAWS with Firefox instead. But the two go-to ones that I always consistently test is I always say, I'm going to use NVDA with Firefox and VoiceOver with Safari. That's going to be my starting point with these standard technology approaches. So my suggestion is, decide which versions of assistive technology and browsers you want to test with and kind of stick to that. I mean, be very cautious of trying to test JAWS with Chrome and then NVDA with IE. And then, if you've got a reason to do that, then go for it. But I always like to start with kind of a standard template or standard platform and application to see how that behaves before I decide to get really creative. And, stick with the default settings initially. But don't be limited by those. So this oftentimes comes up particularly when you're dealing with phone numbers or credit card numbers or things like that, or names and such. Punctuation is not always announced with the default settings. So try with the default settings, but don't be afraid to experiment a little bit. What do other people use with their assistive technology platforms and testing? Is there anything that anyone else is using? Don't be shy now. Come on now. You can admit that you use.
I had a computer science instructor ask me if Bobby was still in use. he's a new hire. And so at the very least, exposing him to Wave.
Okay. Excellent. Yeah, we'll definitely be touching on that in the next meeting on Wave and some of these other tools. All right. So there's a lot of different assistive technologies out there that you can use. I know some people like to use Windowise, things like that. So whatever platform you're going to be using, I like to come up with a standard stack. And the other part I like to do is figure out what your college is using and what might be appropriate in that environment that you're testing. Recognizing that not all combinations go together. I mean, Chrome, everybody wants to use Chrome. Great. If you want to use that browser, fantastic. Not all assistive technologies work well with Chrome, particularly screen readers and magnification software. They just don't always work well. So be cognizant that some combinations are going to be more challenging, and it's not so much that the application and the website is a problem, but rather the barrier could be between the compatibility between the assistive technology and the browser itself. All right, so we're almost at the top of the hour. We've got a couple of events that are coming up. On March 9th, we're going to continue our IT accessibility office hours. We're going to be focusing on automated accessibility testing. So that'll be next month. But next week, we're going to be having a vendor do a presentation on PDF documents and using the Equidocs platform to do PDF remediation. So a gentleman named Pat McGovern, he'll be presenting on what the Equidocs tool can do to fix the PDF documents. And then March will be coming up with the Grackle Docs plugin for Google Docs and how to make PDFs accessible from Google Docs with their Grackle Docs plugin. So those are some upcoming events. So as we finish up here, what questions, any other questions people may have? And just,
Donna's got one about captioning. How did you get a captioner in this session?
Yes, actually, I was just about to respond. Basically, to get captioning with CCC Confer, you send an email to client services. And at least that's what I do. Requesting real-time caption services for the time and date of my presentation. So please reach out to client services at CCC Confer. Other questions that people may have?
Good basic.
Yes, so we have an IT access mailing list. I think it might be the best way that I can talk about some of the data visualization information. I can post it out on that list. If you're to gain access to that IT access mailing list, it's a closed list for California Community College members. You can go ahead and email me at my email address, which is, I'll post that into the chat region right now. And so I'll post a response to the IT access mailing list, but I can also send you a direct email if you send me an email, because email's cheap as opposed to snail mail. Other questions?
No, thanks.
Excellent. Thanks, everybody. Somebody actually posted a question about PowerPoint files. Are PowerPoint files now accessible? Unfortunately, PowerPoint, the application, has gotten to be much more accessible, but it depends on the content you add. Whether or not if you're using the standard slide templates, if you're using the text description fields for images. So you have to use a lot of the standard slide template fields. And then it will work with assistive technologies. The standard, PowerPoint file itself with the application. But it is a question mark in terms of what is the content of that file. There are ways of converting the PowerPoint to accessible PDF versions. And they actually work pretty well, particularly coming from Microsoft Office on the Windows side and saving out as a PDF version. So if it's kind of a standard, no frills PowerPoint presentation, then it does come across fairly well in the PDF. Can't say it's going to be perfect every time. All right, well, thanks very much, everyone. So next week we have the webinar session with the vendor on PDF remediation with Equidocs. And then next month, we'll be talking about automated accessibility testing. So ask your questions on the IT Access mailing list if you're participating there. Otherwise, save them up, and we will see you in March.
Hey, Sean, are you still on the line?
I am. I'm going to stop the recording. One moment.
Okay.